Imagine a palace with 127 rooms in which no one has ever spent a single night. Imagine majestic granite towers rising above the cold waters of the St. Lawrence River, which look as if they were transported straight from medieval Germany, but they stand on the border between the United States of America and Canada. This place was supposed to become a paradise filled with laughter, the clinking of crystal, and the rustle of expensive silks. But instead, it plunged into deafening silence for 73 years. We are accustomed to seeing ruins of ancient civilizations destroyed by wars or centuries, but before you is a completely different story. These are the ruins of a dream that was destroyed not by time or enemies, but by a single heartbeat. Welcome to the island marked on maps as Heart Island or Heart Island, but locals and historians know it by another name, Boldt Castle. This is perhaps the most tragic architectural monument in North America. Today, tourists wander through its echoing halls, admiring the stucco and marble, but few of them think about what an incredible and painful drama is hidden behind every stone of this fortress. Why did 300 workers on one cold January day in 1904 suddenly drop their tools, leaving half-drunk coffee and unfinished mosaics, and never return? Why did the man who possessed a fortune capable of buying a small country never once cross the threshold of the house he built for 4 years with manic obsession? To understand this story, we need to forget what we know about classic fairy tales where the prince and princess live happily ever after. Here, the fairy tale broke off a second before the finale. But who was the author of this unfinished masterpiece? It seemed impossible that this colossal project was the brainchild of a man who began his path at the very bottom of the social ladder. His name was George Carl Boldt.
And before becoming the king of American hospitality, he was nobody.
Let's go back in time to the 1860s. Imagine a 13-year-old boy, an immigrant from Prussia, stepping ashore in New York. His pockets are empty, he speaks English poorly, and his first job is a stuffy, humid kitchen where he washes mountains of dirty dishes around the clock. No one passing by this tired teenager with hands red from hot water could have imagined that he alone would forever change the concept of luxury in the Western world. No one knew that this very dishwasher would one day become the manager and owner of the most legendary hotel in history, the Waldorf Astoria. The contrast between the beginning of his life and its peak is simply staggering. George Boldt was not an aristocrat who inherited wealth. He was a visionary who saw what others missed. He was the one who turned service into an art and wealth into a tool for creating beauty.
But Boldt Castle was not a demonstration of his power or wealth, as many envious people thought.
It was not a monument to vanity. It was a love letter written in stone. Every tower, every stained glass window, every square centimeter of granite was intended for one single woman, his wife, Louise. However, history had other plans. The castle, conceived as the most grandiose Valentine's Day gift, became the most expensive tombstone in history. We stand on the threshold of a mystery that lasted for decades. How could a man who controlled every detail in his giant hotels, from the freshness of flowers to the doorman's smile, fail to foresee and prevent the collapse of his own happiness? And what really happened in those fateful days at the beginning of the 20th century when a telegram with the text, "Stop all work," turned a living project into a dead ghost? This story is not just about bricks and gold. It is about the fragility of human life in the face of fate. It is about the fact that even billions of dollars cannot buy one more breath from a loved one. Ahead lies a journey into the mind of a genius who built an empire
but lost the meaning of his existence. We will see how poverty tempered his character, how love created a dream, and how death stopped time. Get ready, because the truth about Boldt Castle is much deeper and sadder than the beautiful legends from tourist brochures. To truly understand why George Boldt chose precisely an isolated island for his greatest creation, we need to go back to the very origins of his life, to the cold winds of the Baltic Sea. George Karl Boldt was born in 1851 on the Prussian island of Rügen. This is a critically important detail that is often overlooked. He was born on an island and died, leaving behind a legend on an island. Water was always his element, his boundary between safety and the outside world. But mid-19th century Prussia was a place of rigid hierarchy and limited opportunities for the son of not wealthy parents. His veins carried the blood of a man who refused to accept the place fate had assigned him at birth. In 1864, when the United States of America was torn apart by the Civil War, 13-year-old George set foot on American soil. Imagine this cultural shock. A boy from a German island plunges into the boiling cauldron of New York. He had no connections, no money, and his English was far from perfect. But he had what set him apart from thousands of other immigrants, an analytical, almost predatory mind. He started working in the kitchen, at the very bottom of the hotel business food chain. For most, it was hellish labor, a poverty trap. For Boldt, it was a school. He didn't just wash dishes, he observed. Boldt's philosophy began to form right there, amid the steam and noise of restaurant kitchens. He quickly grasped the paradox of American society. New money craved recognition, while old money craved comfort. He saw a niche no one else occupied. At that time, hotels were just places to sleep, often dirty and unsafe. Boldt, however, saw a hotel as a theater, where every guest should feel like the main hero of the play. He realized that if you gave people not just a bed, but a sense of exclusivity, they would pay any price. This was not just service, it was the psychology of manipulation through comfort. The fateful turn in his career happened not in New York, but in Philadelphia. Young, ambitious George got a job at the exclusive Philadelphia Club. It was a closed society of gentlemen, a bastion of the old aristocracy. Here he learned to distinguish real crystal from fakes, mastered the subtleties of etiquette, and understood how the people who run the world think. It was here that his dual nature emerged. On one hand, he was the ideal servant, invisible, attentive, impeccable. On the other hand, inside him grew a strategist who despised the role of servant. He looked at the wealthy club members not with envy, but as equals who simply didn't know of his existence yet. His struggle was quiet but fierce. It was a battle of an outsider against a rigid class system. Boldt possessed Prussian discipline and American enterprise, a deadly combination for his competitors. He worked 18 hours a day, obsessed with details. If a tablecloth lay unevenly, it was a personal insult to him. If a guest waited an extra minute for their order, it was a failure. He built his reputation brick by brick, turning his name into a synonym for quality. But even the most brilliant strategist needs an ally. And it was within the walls of the Philadelphia Club that he found what he was looking for. Not an investor, not a patron, but the daughter of the club manager. Her name was Louise Augusta Carer. She was not a socialite from high society. She was the daughter of a steward. She knew this business inside out, just as well as George. Their meeting was not a random spark of passion. It was the recognition of a kindred spirit. Louise saw in this serious young German the same fire that burned within her.
She understood his ambitions because she shared them. In a world where marriages were often made for convenience, their union became something unique. It was a team. Louise became not just a wife, she became his chief advisor, his critic, and his muse. By the end of the 1870s, George Boldt was no longer just a hired worker. He was a man with a plan. He had accumulated enough experience and, more importantly, the trust of influential people to take his first independent step. He was going to turn the hospitality industry upside down. His worldview was formed. Nothing is impossible for those who are willing to work harder than everyone else and who understand human desires better than the people themselves. He was ready to step out of the shadows. But no one, not even Louise herself, could have imagined how high this former dishwasher would soar and what price he would have to pay for that flight. Their joint path to the top was just beginning, and ahead lay New York, which they planned to conquer together. When we talk about a successful man at the end of the 19th century, we usually imagine a lone wolf, a tough industrialist. But the secret of George Boldt's rise was that he was never alone. Louise was not just a trophy or a homemaker. She was his strategic partner, his secret weapon in the battle for the hearts of the elite. If George was the brain of the operation, building logistics and finances, then Louise was its soul. It was she who first understood that rich people want not just luxury, but comfort that their huge, cold mansions lack. She introduced live flowers into hotel interiors, soft lighting through pink lampshades, and candles on tables, details that seem banal today, but were a revolution then. This was a fusion of masculine Prussian discipline and feminine intuition. This tandem attracted the attention of America's most powerful dynasty, the Astors. This was the moment when new money and talent met old money and power. William Waldorf Astor, a man with unlimited resources and a complex character, was looking for a manager for his new grand project on the site of the old family mansion in New York. He chose Boldt. It was a risk, but it paid off 1,000-fold. When the Waldorf Hotel opened in 1893, it instantly became the center of the universe for high society. But Boldt's true strategic genius was revealed 4 years later. Next to the Waldorf, William's cousin, John Jacob Astor IV, began building his own hotel, the Astoria. The Astor family was feuding, and the two buildings could have become monuments to this feud. George Boldt achieved the impossible. He convinced the cousins to connect the buildings with a corridor and manage them as a single entity. Thus was born the legendary Waldorf Astoria. The hyphen in this name became a symbol of Boldt's diplomatic triumph. He became the highest-paid hired manager in the world, earning millions by today's rates. He was no longer a servant. He was the host of the ball that kings and presidents sought to attend. But the higher Boldt soared in New York, the more he needed a refuge. The noise of the city, constant stress, and the spotlight required a counterbalance. And here begins the story of the island. In the mid-1890s, the Boldt family discovered the Thousand Islands archipelago on the St. Lawrence River. It was a fashionable place, a playground for the Gilded Age elite, where magnates built summer residences to escape the heat of the metropolises. But Boldt didn't want just a cottage. His ambitions demanded the creation of his own world. He purchased the island, which was then called Hart Island, which meant deer, and the first thing he did was rename it. He changed one letter, turning the name into Heart. This was not just a beautiful gesture, it was a declaration. Heart Island. He hired engineers to alter the island's shoreline itself, giving it the shape of a heart. Imagine the level of power and resources. A man doesn't just buy land, he changes geography to fit his romantic metaphor. This was the fusion of nature and human will, preparing the canvas for the main masterpiece. First, more modest structures appeared on the island. But in Boldt's head, a plan for something grandiose was already maturing. He wanted to give Louise not just a house, but a castle that would eclipse everything his millionaire neighbors were building. It was to be a real Rhine castle transported to North America, a symbol of their journey, from German roots to the American pinnacle. He hired the architectural firm G.W.&W.D. Hewitt and gave them carte blanche. Budget? Unlimited. Deadlines?
By February 14th, 1904, Louise's birthday, according to one version, it was a gift specifically for Valentine's Day, combined with the celebration of her birthday. Thus, on the turn of the centuries, in the damned year 1900, the construction of the century began. Hundreds of workers, masons, wood carvers, and artists were brought to the island. Granite was quarried from nearby sites, marble was shipped from Italy, tapestries from France. This was the beginning of the end. Boldt was creating a monument to his love, unaware that every stone laid was bringing him closer to tragedy. Heart Island was to become a place of eternal summer and happiness, a fortress protecting their family from the outside world. But, as we will soon see, even the strongest walls cannot protect against what is already written in one's fate. The dream began to take physical form, rising floor by floor above the cold water. To truly grasp the scale of the loss, you must first feel the scale of the vision.
Let's take a mental journey to Heart Island, as it was envisioned at the zenith of construction in the summer of 1903. Imagine gliding in a boat across the dark waters of the St. Lawrence River. The fog clears, and before you rises from the water something that has no place in the reality of North America. This is not just a house, it is an architectural symphony frozen in stone, a grandiose set for the opera that George Boldt was composing for his beloved Louise. The first thing that catches the eye is the powerhouse, and here begins Boldt's psychological game. You see an elegant medieval tower with an arched bridge, reminiscent of an ancient fortress somewhere in Bavaria. But inside this medieval structure beats the most modern technological heart of its time, powerful steam generators supplying the island with electricity. This is a key stroke in the portrait of the master. On the outside, impeccable romantic tradition. On the inside, ruthless efficiency and cutting-edge technology. Boldt loved history, but preferred to live in the future. Passing through the monumental Arch of Glory, the Watergate intended for greeting guests arriving by yacht, you enter a world where reality is subordinate to fantasy. The entire complex includes not one, but a full 6 buildings. From the gigantic yacht house on the neighboring island, where guests' floating palaces were stored, to the eccentric Ulster Tower. This tower, by the way, deserves special attention. The Boldt family lived precisely in it while the main castle was being built. The Ulster Tower is an architectural joke, a playhouse with intentionally crooked walls, uneven staircases, and a roof as if molded from fairy tale dough. Here Boldt allowed himself to relax. Here reigned a spirit of improvisation, in contrast to the strict symmetry of the main building. But let's enter the main castle. 6 floors, 127 rooms, 30 bathrooms. The numbers sound dry until you convert them into man-hours and tons of granite. 300 masters, masons, carpenters, artists labored here daily.
The project's cost was estimated at $2.5 million of that time, an amount equivalent to tens of millions today. It was not just a home for one family, it was an autonomous city-state. The heart of the castle is the central rotunda. Raise your head. Above you hovers a dome of stained glass, letting in soft amber light that was meant to flood the grand staircase. This staircase is made of Italian marble, and it is designed so that any descent on it turns into a queen's grand entrance. The wrought iron railings, brought from Europe, were adorned with deer emblems, the symbol of the island, heart, deer before the renaming. Every detail here screams Boldt's perfectionism. He personally approved every sketch. The walls were to be paneled with oak, cherry, and mahogany, creating an atmosphere of warmth and eternity. Boldt's hotelier psychology is traced in the infrastructure invisible to guests. A network of underground tunnels was dug under the island. Why? So that servants could move ice, coal, food, and linens between buildings without being seen by the owners and guests. Just like in his famous Waldorf Astoria, the magic of comfort was meant to seem to arise from nowhere. No carts with dirty linens against the sunset backdrop, only a perfect picture. An elevator was even planned here, an unheard-of luxury for a private home in the early 20th century. On the first floor were located the billiard room, library, and ballroom. Imagine this hall. Huge floor-to-ceiling windows, mirrors arranged to reflect candlelight and create the illusion of infinite space, and polished parquet ready for waltzes. Boldt was building a stage on which he and Louise were to receive the American elite, finally affirming their status. This was not just a demonstration of new money wealth. It was a claim to create their own aristocracy. Rising higher, we enter the private quarters. Louise's bedroom is the culmination of tenderness. The windows face the river so she could see the sunrise. The fireplace is adorned with the finest carving. There is no pomp here as downstairs. Intimacy reigns here. Boldt wanted to create a cocoon for her, protected from the whole world. Rooms for children, for guests, for servants. Each zone was clearly delineated. The fourth floor was almost entirely dedicated to a huge skylight illuminating the rotunda, an engineering marvel of its time. In the fall of 1903, the castle was 90% complete. The walls stood, the roof was finished, heating and plumbing systems were already being tested. In the basements stood crates of Italian marble awaiting installation. In warehouses in New York, furniture, carpets, paintings, and sculptures had already been purchased, ready for shipment north. The castle breathed anticipation. It smelled of fresh sawdust, plaster, and river coolness. It seemed that the very air on the island was electrified with expectation of the celebration. This was the peak of human ambition. George Boldt, the former dishwasher from a Prussian island, stood on the terrace of his American castle and looked at the river. He had conquered poverty. He had conquered social prejudices. He had built an empire. And now, he was building paradise for the woman who had walked this path with him. It seemed that fate itself favored him. But fate, as is known, has a cruel sense of irony. While hammers were banging on the island, finishing the facade, in New York, hundreds of miles away, invisible clocks began their countdown. The grandeur of this castle made its inhabitants not gods, but merely small figures in a vast, cold universe that was preparing to strike. The majesty of architecture was about to collide with the fragility of the human heart. January 1904. New York is gripped by ice, but in the corridors of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel,
It is warm, bright, and smells of fresh lilies. George Boldt is at the peak of his power. He is 52 years old. He manages the most prestigious hotel on the planet. His fortune is counted in millions. And in the north, among the ice of the St. Lawrence River, the construction of his main life project is nearing completion. There was only 1 month left until Valentine's Day, the date when he planned to hand Louise the keys to the castle. Everything was going according to the perfectly calibrated plan, like the Swiss watches he loved so much. But here we encounter the deep moral ambivalence of this story. Was this castle an act of pure love, or a monument to selfish obsession? George spent the last 4 years in constant tension, torn between managing the hotel and the construction. He wanted to create a perfect world for Louise, but in pursuit of this ideal, he might have missed life itself. We often see this in the stories of great men. They build palaces for their queens, forgetting that queens need the presence of the king, not just his gold. Louise Augusta Boldt, the woman who was a quiet harbor for his stormy temperament, began to fade. This was not a sudden fall off a cliff. It was a slow exhaustion. She was only 43 years old, according to some sources, 42. But the stress of life at the top of the social pyramid and, possibly, hidden heart problems were making themselves known. While 300 workers were polishing marble on the distant island, the woman for whom that marble was quarried was growing weaker in her New York apartment. On January 7, 1904, the catastrophe happened. Not on the construction site, not in a stormy sea, but in the silence of the bedroom. Louise Boldt's heart stopped. The doctors pronounced her dead. In 1 second, all the gold in the world, all the stocks, all the titles and honors of George Boldt became worthless. The man who could procure strawberries in winter and fresh oysters thousands of miles from the sea for his clients proved powerless before the simplest biological fact of death. This is the moment that completely changes the genre of our story. From a romantic saga of success, it turns into an ancient tragedy. Boldt's reaction was instantaneous and devastating. He did not seek solace in work. He did not continue building the castle in her memory, as often happens in beautiful legends. No. His decision was dictated by unbearable pain, bordering on madness. He sent a telegram to the island. The text was dry, short, and final. There were no emotions in it, only an order. Stop all work. Imagine this scene on Hart Island. A cold January day. The wind from the river chills to the bone. 300 men work in the rhythm set by years of construction. Hammers bang, saws screech, foreman's commands are heard, and suddenly, silence. The telegram is passed from hand to hand. The construction manager reads it, pales, and gives the command. Tools fall from hands. This is one of the most dramatic moments in the history of architecture. The workers did not mothball the site. They simply left. Legends say they left their tools right where they stood. Uneaten lunches remained on the tables. Crates of precious Italian tile remained unpacked on the dock. The half-assembled chandelier lay on the ballroom floor. Life on the island ended as suddenly as Louise's life. George Boldt committed an act that many at the time could not understand. He simply turned away. He forbade himself and everyone else even to speak of this place. The castle, into which so much passion, money, and hope had been poured, instantly became a cursed place for him. He could not look at these towers, because each one was a reminder of what he had lost. This was not just a widower's grief. It was the collapse of a world view. He believed that if you do everything right, if you work hard and control every detail, happiness is guaranteed. Louise's death proved to him that he controlled nothing. Here we see the birth of the ghost. Boldt Castle died on the same day as Louise. It remained standing as a dark silhouette against the winter sky, full of drafts and shadows. The greatest gift of love became the greatest symbol of loneliness. George Boldt would live another 12 years. He would continue managing his hotel, remaining a rich and respected man. But he would never, not once in those 12 years, set foot on the island he had named Heart. Thus ended the era of construction and began the era of decay. Ahead lies a long, dark night lasting 73 years. We will see how nature and vandals tried to destroy what death could not, and how this castle became a Rorschach test for everyone who passed by. Some saw in it great love, others great folly. Silence fell that lasted 73 years. If, up to this point, our story was a drama of love and death, now it turns into a chronicle of slow, agonizing decay. From 1904 to 1977, Boldt Castle was left to the mercy of architecture's most ruthless enemies: time, weather, and human indifference. Imagine what was happening on the island when the last guards left. The St. Lawrence River, which was supposed to serve as a picturesque backdrop, turned into a destroyer. Harsh Canadian winters, humidity, and icy winds began their work. The unfinished and unprotected roof began to leak. Water seeped through the ceilings, destroying the plaster, chunks of which fell off, exposing the brick skeleton of the building. The expensive parquet swelled and rotted. Those very tunnels, created for the inconspicuous movement of servants, became paths for drafts and wild animals. But nature was more merciful than people. For decades, the island was uninhabited, and it became a magnet for vandals. What George Boldt created with such reverence was destroyed with cynical cruelty. Visitors arriving by boat under the cover of night pried out marble fireplaces, smashed the remains of stained glass with stones, and covered the walls with graffiti. The furniture that wasn't removed in time was stolen or burned right in the halls. The castle turned into a haunted house, not of mystical ghosts, but of quite real ghosts of neglect. This was a crisis of meaning. A palace built for the greatest feeling became a symbol of decay. George Boldt died in 1916 in his suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, never breaking his vow not to return to the island. His children, Clover and Louise, also wanted nothing to do with this place. For them, it was a stone monster that had swallowed the happiness of their mother and father. At some point, the island was sold to Edward John Noble, the Candy King, creator of Lifesavers candies, but even he had no clear vision of what to do with this behemoth. The castle continued to die, turning into ruins dangerous for the lives of casual tourists. By the mid-1970s, it seemed that the story of Boldt Castle would end in complete oblivion. The building was on the verge of collapse. Local authorities seriously discussed demolishing the remains so they wouldn't spoil the view. But it was precisely at this moment of deepest crisis that a transformation occurred. In 1977, the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority made a decision that seemed insane. They purchased the island. The deal amount went down in history as one of the most paradoxical figures in real estate. The entire complex, castle, towers, power station, yacht house, was transferred for $1. $1 for a dream that cost millions. But the deal had a condition.
All revenues received from tourists must be reinvested exclusively into restoration. And here occurred a fundamental shift in the philosophy of this place. The new owners did not aim to finish the castle as Boldt wanted. They had no intention of turning it into a hotel or residence. Their goal became preservation. They decided not to erase the scars of time completely, but to conserve the history of the tragedy. A process began that can be called resurrection. First, workers patched the roof, stopping the water infiltration that was killing the building from the inside. Then they began removing tons of garbage accumulated over 70 years. They cleaned walls of graffiti, restored windows, and reinforced the foundation.
This was not just construction. It was the archaeology of emotions. The transcendence of this moment lies in the change of purpose. George Boldt built a fortress to shut himself off from the world with his beloved. But the castle's salvation came from opening it to the world. What was conceived as the most private space became the most public. One man's personal tragedy transformed into public heritage. People began returning to the island not as vandals, but as witnesses. With each restored hall, with each repaired staircase flight, the castle changed its energy. From a place of grief, it turned into a place of memory. The second character in our story, society, people, tourists, with their attention and tickets, began to pay for what the billionaire could not finish. This is an amazing irony. Boldt's money built the walls, but it was ordinary people buying entry tickets for a few dollars who saved those walls from turning to dust.
By the end of the 20th century, it became clear. Boldt Castle survived. It passed through the fire of loss, the ice of oblivion, and the humiliation of vandalism, to be reborn in a new quality. It was no longer just an unfinished structure. It became a monument to the fact that love, even if it ends tragically, is capable of creating things that outlive their creators. The crisis passed. The castle found its voice, and now it was ready to tell its story to millions, becoming an eternal reminder that we plan eternity, but possess only a moment. Only one question remained ahead. What lesson should we, living today, draw from these granite walls? Today, if you step onto the granite embankment of Hart Island, you will be greeted not by the silence of oblivion, but by the lively hum of voices. Every summer, hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world cross the river to touch this legend.
Boldt Castle is no longer a ruin, but it also did not become the lived-in home its creator envisioned. Now it is something else, a unique space between the past and the present, between the life that could have been and the history that actually happened. The Thousand Islands Bridge Authority invested tens of millions of dollars in the restoration, an amount many times exceeding what George Boldt himself spent. The irony of fate lies in the fact that this money came not from one rich patron, but from the pockets of millions of ordinary people, each of whom left a piece of themselves in these walls. Walking through the restored halls of the first floor, you will see the shine that Boldt dreamed of. The stained glass dome once again shines with amber light, casting colored shadows on the marble staircase. The billiard room, dining room, ballroom, all of them look as if the owners stepped out just a minute ago. But as soon as you ascend the upper floors, you will encounter the most poignant lesson of this place. The restorers made a brilliant decision. They did not finish everything to the end. Some rooms are left in the state they were in January 1904. Bare beams, brickwork, workers' pencil marks on the walls. These are the building's open wounds. It is precisely here, in these unfinished spaces, that you physically feel the moment when time stopped. This is an emptiness that speaks louder than any luxurious furniture.
Boldt Castle today has become a stage for one of the most amazing human paradoxes. A place born from the greatest tragedy of separation has become one of the most popular wedding venues in North America. Every year, hundreds of couples pronounce vows of fidelity till death do us part, precisely where death separated George and Louise. It would seem that this should be a bad omen, but people feel otherwise. They see in this castle not a symbol of loss, but a symbol of the power of love that can survive even death and destruction. Boldt's desire to create a monument to his wife was fulfilled, even if not as he planned. He wanted to give her a home, but he gave her immortality. This story teaches us a cruel but necessary lesson about the nature of success and ambition. George Boldt was the embodiment of the American dream. He proved that perseverance and hard work can lift a person from the very bottom to the pinnacle of the world. He controlled thousands of employees, managed million-dollar flows, and dictated fashion and tastes to an entire generation. But his castle stands as a reminder that there is a limit to human control. We can build walls a meter thick, we can buy the best medicines and surround ourselves with an army of servants. But we cannot buy one more day of life for those we love. Boldt Castle is a monumental memento mori, a reminder of death carved in granite and adorned with gold. This story is often compared to The Great Gatsby by Francis Scott Fitzgerald. Like Jay Gatsby, George Boldt built his palace for one woman, trying to materialize his love through architectural grandeur. But if Gatsby is fiction, Boldt is reality. And if Gatsby's dream crumbled to dust, Boldt's dream petrified. This castle is called the American Taj Mahal, and the comparison is absolutely accurate. Like the Indian Shah Jahan, Boldt transformed his grief into beauty that has outlived centuries. But the difference is that the Taj Mahal is a tomb, while Boldt Castle is a home, in which life froze a second before the housewarming. For us, living in the 21st century, in the era of digital technologies and instant gratifications, this castle serves as an anchor. It forces us to slow down and ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. What do we work 12 hours a day for? What will remain after us? Do the things we accumulate really matter without the people with whom we can share them? George Boldt never returned to the island, because without Louise, this palace was for him just a pile of stones. This teaches us that what makes a home is not the architect or the designer, but the presence of a loved one. The final glimpse of Hart Island reveals to us a truth that will not be written in history textbooks. Boldt Castle is perfect precisely in its incompleteness. If Louise had survived, if they had lived there a long life, raised grandchildren, and died in old age, this house would most likely have become just another elite mansion, possibly resold as a hotel or demolished by heirs. It was the tragedy that preserved it, turning it into a myth. An unfinished symphony always resonates in our memory, longer than one that was played to the end. When the sun sets over the St. Lawrence River, painting the castle's towers in crimson tones, their shadows stretch toward the water as if trying to touch the past. We leave this island with a feeling of bright sadness. The story of George and Louise Boldt ended more than 100 years ago, but their dialogue continues. It sounds in the noise of the wind gusting through the upper floors and in the quiet whisper of tourists. This is a dialogue about the fact that love is the only currency that does not depreciate over time, and the only legacy that is truly worth building. The castle stands not as a monument to wealth, but as a beacon reminding us, love now
Say the most important words today, because tomorrow is not promised to anyone, not even to the kings of the world.